So I can make sure that we're actually okay. Supposedly we're live. Hello, everyone. If you can see and hear us, how are you all doing today? I know you can't answer, but I hope you're all doing really well. I'm gonna go make sure that everything looks okay real quick, and we will go ahead and start jumping into the questions.
I'm gonna
Um,
check on
oh,
YouTube.
it looks fine
I'm not,
on my end. I actually saw it generate subtitles for when I was speaking, so that was cool. So I guess Skynet's putting in overtime hours right now.
okay,
Um,
yeah, I can see it's live on YouTube, so I'm gonna assume we're
we
live
are
on
good.
Facebook as well.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to another, I guess to say episode, but I don't even know if we would call them that. Another instance of live Q&A here at the Freedom Model. My name is Matthew Sparks. This is my friend and coworker Daniel Pilorge. We are Freedom Model private instructors. We teach one-on-one private lessons. If you're interested in doing that, check us out at thefreedommodel.org. Also, we've got an entire online program called the Freedom Model International, which involves hours and hours and hours of an online curriculum. You get the digital version of our book, the audio version of our book, the workbook. You get personal Q and A's with the co-founders of the program. Um, what else do you get? Oh, you get what do we do? Video lesson a week, right? So you
We
get new
we got
video
the
lessons by us
newsletter.
too. We got the newsletter too. Man, we got all kinds of stuff. Listen, it's only $39.99. You get so much. It's like an unbelievable amount of content. So if you're looking to move on from your addiction problem and not call yourself an addict, or go to meetings, or admit that you're powerless, or commit to lifelong abstinence for the remainder of your existence, check us out. Absolutely, just the best bang for your buck there. And a lot of the questions that we're pulling from today are from people that are interfacing with the content that we have online. So, as per usual, we've selected a number of questions from our primarily from our private Facebook discussion group um, that we're going to be going over today. These are all from the community, and if you're ready, Daniel, we'll go ahead and jump right into it. You good?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. So, question one. This is a quote from a book on addictions that someone posted that we thought we would kind of talk about a little bit. The quote is, I would free myself of this life damaging habit if I could find a life honoring substitute of equal or greater efficacy. A person will refuse to give up a dilapidated car because he has no alternative means of transportation until you offer him a newer model in good running condition. We cannot expect people to relinquish toxic behaviors that provide some relief without offering something to replace them. So that's the end of the quote. Man, there's a lot that could be said about that for a number of reasons, but I'll go ahead, Daniel. I'll let you dive into that.
Yeah, well, part of it I thought, yes, does resemble what we're saying. In the book, there's the analogy of, outgrowing a bike and moving on to a car. So as much as you love your bike, then the day you get a car, you just kind of like completely forget about your bike and, enjoy your car and move on. Um, but then there's like that idea that like somehow substances are offering relief, which if you know anything about our model, you understand why that we're kind of like not really. And it presupposes this idea that basically what you have to do is to build a better life for yourself, right? um, which can be helpful, but as many people know, there's lots of people that have great lives that still have like serious substance use problems, right? They're still doing way too many drugs and they have a wonderful life. So it's not like, oh, I have a crappy life, so I need to have a better one and that's going to resolve my issue. It's not really that straightforward. Um, so with the freedom model, like we really focus on, the strategies of self change, right? How do they do that? Rather than just go, well, you have to find like a better life for yourself, or you have to find ultimate happiness for yourself. No, there's a number of people, and I talked about one guy who I knew years ago, and when I was going to meetings, who was just the most miserable person I've ever met, and he still wasn't doing drugs, and because he was like, no, it would just make my life
We must
even
know the
worse.
same people.
So it's not this idea of like having to build a better life for yourself in order to move on from your substance, from your heavy use. No, it's not that straightforward. Will it help? Well, yeah, because obviously, if I have a lot of money, if I have a lot of activities going on, I have a lot of other things that bring pleasure in my life, obviously it's going to be a lot easier for me to like put the dope aside. That's on some level. But that's not going to guarantee anything. And it's definitely not going to make me like drugs less. Right. So, again, there's in the book, there's that story. I think Stephen wrote that part where this girl wanted to go. She was off in the Alps or something, some crazy ski resort place that was like really awesome and everything was great. But she was miserable as hell because all she was thinking about
Right.
was getting high. Right. It's like all
But
she
it's
wanted
like
to do was get
family
loaded.
vacation, I think.
Yeah, she couldn't enjoy anything because what really mattered for her as a person was the drugs, and the drugs were not there, right? So it's like even though the environment was wonderful, there was this disconnect, and she just couldn't enjoy it.
Right.
So yeah, as much as there is a half truth in that quote, there's that other part that I think is completely off, where it's like, oh, you have to relinquish the toxic behaviors and blah blah blah. It's like because they're providing some sort of relief, right?
Right.
It's you. There's still that presupposition that drugs have magic, right? That they have these magical powers that are helping you, right? And that's literally what we bust apart, right? Because once the magical powers of substances are out of your mind, right? Once you realize the truth about them, like no, you don't feel the urge to like run around and do tons of them because they're kind of like meaningless. I think a really good example, just to finish off on that, would be like someone with psychedelics, for example. Like this entire push for psychedelics, that they somehow help with like trauma and all these mental health issues and stuff. Like, yeah, that's a very powerful presupposition to have. But if you gave magic mushrooms to someone who did not believe that, who'd never heard that stuff, they would just feel like really intoxicated and really messed up. They would not be having some sort of magical spiritual experience and moving on from their trauma or whatever. They would just feel really messed up, kind of like back in the 50s when they were giving LSD to psychiatric patients in psychiatric institutes. Like they were not having good trips. Okay, they were not enjoying themselves.
I can't think of a
So they
worse place to be doing LSD and stuck in a psych ward, man.
Exactly. And and you're there with a bunch of people that are also there, they're having the opposite presupposition where they're like, oh, this person's gonna go completely insane. So yeah, that's literally what would happen. People would just go a bit bonkers. So yeah. I thought we should bust that apart because there's partial truth to it, but on another level, it's very, very off from our message.
Right.
So, anyways, I think you can comment more on that.
I mean, that's, I would basically kind of just reiterate most of what you just said, and that there is truth in this, and the idea that, like, we see people in positions sometimes where we don't understand why they don't leave whatever circumstance that they're in, whether it be in a bad relationship or they're in a bad job or something like that. Why is someone still driving a piece of crap car if they can afford another one, etc. Until this person is presented with some sort of incentive or opportunity that's more appealing to them than the comfort of not leaving whatever position that they're in is. And this is something that I talk about a lot, which is like understanding people's behavior when they're sort of caught up in the pattern of using drugs heavily. People from the outside act as if their behavior is nonsensical. It doesn't make any sense. Why do they keep doing this? Why are they destroying their whole lives? I don't get it. Why can't you just stop? Blah, 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 blah. And the drug user will even become convinced that they don't understand their own behavior. Like it's completely baffling to them. But in actuality, if you look at it from the perspective that kind of Daniel was just talking about, where basically the drugs have magic powers, it can like heal you of your trauma or solve your emotional distress or distract you from all the horrors of the world going on around you, or like the fact that you hate your wife's cooking and now you got to go eat meatloaf for dinner, or like God, whatever it could be. Like it makes sense why the person would keep doing the drug. It's a completely logical decision because the drug offers them all these things that nothing else offers. So it's literally just the person making a regular, just totally standard cost benefit analysis. Am I going to keep doing this because it has XYZ benefits? or I'm going to stop doing this or go do something else. Just because we don't understand it doesn't mean that it's nonsensical. And just because other people are telling you that they don't understand it doesn't mean that your choices are nonsensical. You're doing something, or you're going to gravitate towards whatever it is that you think is going to give you the most utility or the most happiness. Just naturally, you're going to gravitate in that direction. And if you believe that drugs do all these things, which is why we spend a significant portion of the book busting up the idea that drugs do all these things, like it makes sense that you would gravitate towards drug use. Like whenever I was on drugs every day, I had all kinds of like emotional issues and things that I needed to process, and like I had family problems and relationship problems and money problems, and I thought that whenever I took the drugs, all of this just went away. And if it went away enough, then maybe I would be confident to fix these problems. Well, like, of course, none of that ever happened. Like, and the drugs wasn't actually helping me fix any of these problems. I was just basically giving myself permission as I ingested the substance. Okay, it's time to check out and not worry about this anymore. And that became a very comfortable position for me to be in. Just like if someone stays at a job that seems really awful, maybe they're too afraid to leave, and that's the most comfortable position that they're in. Or the alternative job, the incentive to leave just isn't high enough yet. Just because someone's behavior from the outside seems nonsensical doesn't mean that it's actually nonsensical. So I know that's kind of a long point, but it's something that I've had to talk about time and time again, because especially when families are involved and they're like, I don't understand, like this makes no sense, like everything that he decides is completely nonsensical. We don't understand why he can't just stop. Like it does make sense. You just have to understand the other person's position enough and their beliefs about drugs and their relationship with the drugs. But once you put that into the equation, the decisions that they're making are oftentimes the only logical decisions to make with using that mental framework. Obviously, they're not correct, but under that belief system, that makes total sense. Um, Second, as Daniel said, like we, the idea that you need to replace your drug habit with something in order to stop doing drugs is kind of a toxic one. Like just not even kind of, it just is a toxic belief, because you don't need a replacement. Period. Like uh, if you eat tacos from Jack in the Box and it makes you sick every time that you eat it, you don't need to go replace it with something else on the menu to be able to stop ordering tacos from Jack in the Box. You just stop doing it because it's making you sick, or you don't want to do it anymore. Whenever you whenever you understand that you're in complete control of what it is that you're deciding to do and you have reasons for doing these things, whenever those reasons become tainted or it's just not worth it anymore, it's very easy to just stop doing the thing. And once you sort of unlearn all this mythology about drugs, you can do the same thing about drugs. So you don't need a replacement. That being said, I do advocate that everyone attempts to make their lives better, because obviously it's easier to have a clear view of everything that you want to do whenever you're not stressed out all the time and your life is not absolute catastrophe, or there's not a bunch of terrible things going on. Like one of the things that you'll get with the freedom model, whenever if you stop using drugs or you start using way less, or the consequences go down because of whatever change that you made, is you'll have a lot of extra time and probably a lot of extra energy too. And I had a lot of extra time and energy despite all the things that I was doing, which was a lot at the time. Um, and I used that to make my life better. I went back to school. I got into a different field. I did all kinds of stuff. And although I didn't need to do that to quit doing drugs, it certainly made me a happier person. As he said, he knows people that are absolutely miserable that have years of consecutive sobriety. Go into any AA meeting that's like been established for some time, and you will easily find some guy or woman there who's, probably, in their 30s, 40s, 50s, or even older. They've got like a decade plus of sobriety, if not much more than that. They're sort of like the self-appointed like guru or like old timer of the meeting, but they're so fucking miserable. They're so unhappy. And it seems like their shares are full of like spite and resentment. And they're angry about being sober. They just seem so unhappy. So like, you don't need to be happy to stop doing whatever it is that you're trying to stop doing, drugs, alcohol, whatever it is. Like, but it is just better in general if your life isn't miserable, obviously. So, um, I think that's all I got. I mean, we pulled a lot out of that quote, considering I think it's only 2 sentences long. Um,
Yeah.
you don't need an alternative, is the point. You don't need to replace. You don't need to replace your drug use with meetings or a sponsor or working the steps or a new car or exercise and dieting or like whatever it is that most people try to replace their drug habits with, if you don't want to do it anymore, truly, you'll just stop doing it. And in that space, you can fill it with whatever you want, and that's awesome. It could be nothing. Sometimes you just want to do nothing. That's great. Sometimes I love doing nothing. But yeah, that's kind of the bottom line there. You don't need an alternative, but also understand that when people are making these decisions and they're sort of weighing what their options are, just because you don't understand the decision, or if they stay somewhere or keep doing something that seems awful to them or awful to other people around them, like to that person, it probably makes sense in some sort of weird, distorted logic. So like, don't like attack them like they've completely lost their mind or touch with reality. Like we can extend like a degree of empathy and charitability to these people because having been in this position, as I'm sure you have too, like the choice to keep using drugs makes sense at the time based on your beliefs about the drugs. So people don't this is not how people operate. If people actually hated the drug and didn't think it was doing anything for them and wasn't helping them, they wouldn't do them every single day, despite like the growing mountain of evidence and negative consequences that they should stop using the drug. Period. So yeah, you got anything else, Daniel, about that?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. People don't spend $300,000 on a luxury car when they don't like driving. You know,
Right.
it's not straightforward. You don't bankrupt yourself and lose your house in order to have a really nice car if you don't like cars.
Right. You got to
It's
really like
pretty much
cars.
so. Yeah, even though it might make zero sense to like people outside of yourself, if you're doing a lot of drugs, it's that behavior is being driven by a belief system um, that somehow it's helping you on some level.
Right.
You're getting some sort of benefit out of that somewhere.
My friends will go
So
to bars and I will stay at home and read academic papers. They think I'm insane. They think I'm completely lost my mind. And that's like such a weird thing to do. It makes total sense to me because I don't have to go spend money. I don't have to wake up with a hangover the next day. I might learn something that I can use for this job or elsewhere or and I just enjoy doing it. Like makes no sense to them or probably to most people, but it makes sense to me. And I'm sure there are things that you could say about your own hobbies or things you're interested in that are the same. I could make the same example about being obsessed with researching addiction. That's how I got into this position. As just as similar to you, like you and I have read a cumulative of like some ungodly number of pages, I'm sure, of addiction literature at this point. Like there's a bookshelf next to you. Mine's over there in the corner. So,
yeah.
um,
No, I
all right.
haven't kept most of them. I got a couple, but the vast majority are not really worth rereading. So I didn't.
Glad.
They've been handed over or chucked. It's like goodbye. I don't need you. Um, I've even read a couple of books that were referenced at school that I know my teachers didn't read, like Valiant's book on alcoholism, which was, oh my God, what a bore. But I swear I went. So, anyways, enough about that. Let's move on
Okay.
to the next one.
Number two, or question two, or kind of a question. My goal isn't to be sober, it's to find a life where I don't want to drink. I've counted days and years in the past, yet deep down I couldn't shake the desire to quote unquote enjoy life with alcohol. These beliefs were ingrained into my life at a very young age. I come from a family of drinkers, yet somehow they view me differently. I remember turning 21 where I could drink with my family and I felt accepted into the fold. However, when I became an alcoholic, was when our family started breaking apart. I have a lot of unpacking to do to challenge my own beliefs and desires surrounding my decisions. I'm grateful that I have the support of the Freedom Model to help me do this. We're grateful for you being here. Honestly, this is more difficult than joining the recovery cult because I actually have to dig deep, and none of it is about making an inventory of amends. It's about challenging my own beliefs. Thank you for reading. Thank you for posting. We appreciate your contribution. Um, Again, there's a bunch of stuff in here. If you want to go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah. Well, I think this person's definitely in the right direction, and you're looking for a place of no longer being in a spot of sacrifice and white knuckling things, right? Because yeah, it's not a black and white issue where it's like, oh, I have to be sober, like some sort of like it's some sort of magical cure all or anything. It's just like you're looking for that place of neutrality, like we were talking about before, where it's like, yeah, I just don't really feel like it, right? Like there's lots of stuff that I've enjoyed in the past that I no longer want to do. Some of them were, healthier than others. Some were more harmful than others. So obviously, if you end up um, listening to freedom model stuff, there's a decent chance that either you or the person that you're listening this for has been doing drugs or drinking in a way that's problematic for them. But yeah, I just look at this and I'm like, I've counted the days and years in the past, and I was just thinking like how toxic that is, that whole idea of counting time,
Oh,
right?
it's so awful.
Because yeah, like the presupposition is, it's like the whole idea is like one day at a time for the rest of your life, right? Like if you were in prison,
Just saying that
the
gives me
only
anxiety, man.
the only person in prison that really should not be wasting their time counting the days is a lifer, right? Like you're never getting out. What's
You're an
the
end
point of
lifer.
counting the time, right? And more importantly than that, you're giving all this power to the substance. Like it's like, oh, I haven't done this in X amount of time. Like it's some sort of giant feat or something, right? Um, like we were talking about scuba diving a while back. I can't tell you when the last time. I'd really have to sit down and look at when was the last time exactly I went scuba diving. Like I loved it for years and years and years, and it was like so awesome, and I had such a great time. And then there was just like a point where I just moved on. I just had all this other stuff going on, and the circumstances were not right, so I haven't been diving for a number of years. But like I said, I'd really have to sit down and count the amount of years. I'm not sure what year it was the last time. And I think it'd be a bit weird if I was sitting down counting the amount of time that I haven't been scuba diving, or that I haven't been on my bicycle, or that I haven't been skiing, or that I haven't been doing any activity that I really enjoyed that had some level of risk, right? Like when I went skiing, I broke both my arms.
Ouch.
On my bicycle, I've wiped out a number of times. Scuba diving, I almost killed myself a few times. It's like activities, high risk activities, but I really enjoyed them, and I didn't stop doing them because they were high risk. I stopped doing them, because I just didn't have time for them in a sense. I was like, oh, I got other priorities, right? So yeah, that whole counting time I think was something to really look at. But like I said, I think you're definitely in the right direction if you're looking at this idea of no longer feeling like drinking all the time, right? That's a lot more of an important way of looking at things than this idea of like, oh, well, it's like my sober time counts, right? I have to be sober and accumulate time. And, that comes from like this really weird ideology where it's like supposedly anonymity means that everybody's on an equal footing. But at the same time, there's this massive hierarchy with
Right.
time, right? And at the same time, it's like you got the time that you say you have because there's lots of people cheating. I spent more than enough time in there to tell you that there's at least half of the people that say that they're
Wondering
sober.
how many
They're
people
not.
were cheating. I was astounded. It was more than I thought it would be.
Oh, it's at least half. It's at least half.
I mean, I
And
was included in there last time I was in sober living, but
I've seen people preach and preach and preach sobriety and abstinence, and it's like they're doing drugs on a regular basis. It's like why would you even, but what can I say, man? There's people out there like that, you
oh
know.
yeah,
Um, so and I think that was brought up pretty well in the 13th Step documentary when there was that guy who was like, well, if you say you got 40 years, you got 40 years, and there you go, like old timer, blah blah blah, which I thought was hilarious with the experience that I had in life because yeah, that's literally it.
right.
Um,
I can
my
walk into a
my
meeting right now and say that I've got 20 years.
listen, I have a really good friend who took his 1 year cake, and then years later he told me he's like, dude, it was BS. It's like I I went to a Metallica show and I got loaded. but I didn't want to like look like an idiot in front of everybody. So I just acted like, I never
God.
relapsed, and, I took my year cake, but it was like a BS cake, you know.
He got to have his
And
cake
now,
and eat it too.
and,
I'm sorry.
like, anyways, I could go on and on about stories like this, of just people who it was like obvious hogwash, but so this whole idea of counting time is irrelevant, and it's again what we were talking about earlier, with people who have a lot of time who are just miserable as hell. There's people that it's for real, like this one guy I know, it would get like 17 or 18 years. And like, I'm positive that it was for real. He hadn't done any drugs in that amount of time. And he was still like this miserable person. So looking at time is a really horrible metric, right? Like a better metric would be like, how happy are you in
Quality of
your life?
life.
Satisfied, like what's your level of life satisfaction, right? Are you happy with, how you're feeling emotionally? Are you happy with how you're feeling physically, and so on and so forth, right? That's a good metric, right? Sitting down and accumulating time in order for, a bunch of people to clap their hands so you have this beautiful little coin, that's like a horrible metric. It's not useful on any level. So, anyways, that's my take on that one.
There's also this embedded um, premise where like your time is a measurement of like your wisdom and the value of your input. And if you go back out, quote unquote, even if you had 10 years and now you're on day one, like all of your experience is now worthless. You're just like, you've got 1 day sober. Nobody wants to hear you talk. Like, you can't possibly have anything of value to contribute. It's like you suddenly have like unlearned an entire decade of whatever it is that you spent the last decade learning. It's like, it's so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous that there's so much emphasis on like counting time and consecutive sobriety. And like, if you reduce your substance habit successfully and your life gets better and the consequences go away, is that not a success? No, I guess not, because you don't have consecutive sobriety. It's just like it's one of the millions of instances of AA basically creating this like one size fits all. Like, there's one definition of success, and we're gonna bottleneck and cram everyone into this, and as the only way that it can work. But anyway, so the
Yeah.
first sentence or the first two sentences are my goal isn't to be sober, it's to find a life where I don't want to drink. This is a position that I've talked about a lot, which is back when I was in this position, I would used to say that I wanted to want to not use drugs, which was basically, I didn't realize how illuminating this admission was at the time because I was still trapped in AA. Because it implies that you still want to do drugs and that's why you're doing them. But I didn't realize that I thought I was just powerless and I was an addict, so I was just doomed to want to do drugs forever. Um, but it's actually, if you're not completely poisoned by AA, and if you're in this group, I hope that you've got enough experience that your perspective isn't as clouded by all the BS that they peddle. That you're at an important point of reflection where you're considering what it is that you want, what it is that you don't want, and you say that you want to find a life where you don't want to drink. That's good. So obviously the step after that is to figure out why you want to drink, which is, obviously we spend enormous amounts of time in the book explaining why someone might want to drink and why those reasons either are completely constructed within your own mind or that you might be able to find those benefits or those utilities elsewhere, etc. But the point is, you're at a point where you're examining your own beliefs. And I tell people all the time that one of the most important things in the world that the freedom model taught me was the ability to examine my own belief system and acknowledge faults in it or places where I was incorrect or my perspective was distorted. Learning how to be wrong or to admit where your own beliefs like just don't hold up is, I think, one of the most important lessons you could possibly learn in life because it allows for adjustment to the truth, which is like what the freedom model is all about. It's all, we're here to give people the truth. Um, so you're at this position and you're considering your own belief system, which is absolutely fantastic. I'm very glad that you're in this spot. So obviously, as I just said, the point from this point forward, you're trying to figure out why it is that you want to continue drinking, what the benefits, which you think the benefits are, and then carefully examining these benefits and see just how real they are, how much they're actually serving you, etc. And considering what life would be like either without drinking or with like a reduced level of alcohol consumption. Because if you truly get to the point, or you get to the point where you truly believe that this isn't serving you to the level that you want it to anymore, and that something else isn't a better option, like this is basically almost over at that point. You're at the point where you can move forward and you can reduce or completely stop drinking. So I think you said something in there that this is more difficult than joining the recovery cult because I actually have to dig deep and none of it is about making inventory or amends or all that. Like, yeah, all that's a distraction. It's all distracting you from examining yourself and your own internal mechanisms, which I know sounds wrong because it's called a personal inventory, but like the personal inventory isn't helping you figure out why you love drinking so much and why you think it makes you happy and whether or not those things are true. It's not
Oh,
helping you with those
it's
things.
not even a personal inventory; it's a
Right.
moral
Oh, sorry.
inventory. Right?
Moral inventory.
Yeah, it's basically like a
Thank you.
good or
That's
bad
that
list,
word makes it
right?
so much worse, actually.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but
Because like a personal inventory would be like on a you could have that on a mental level, right? Where it's like,
right,
oh, my perspective is off, right? But when we're talking about a moral
that's what I said
inventory,
it
we're
would be. It
literally
sounds
talking about
deceptive because you think personal
how am I
inventory
a
would help
good,
you.
yeah, how am I a good or a bad person? Like that's somehow relevant to like me liking drugs. Like
Right.
no,
It's not. Sorry. It's
it,
just not.
it's
Also,
got
the
no
act of
relevance whatsoever.
ingesting drugs is not inherently immoral or moral. It's just an act. Drugs are not
Yeah,
bad or good. They're just things.
exactly.
Um, but this is harder, I will say, probably at first. But this is going to make your life so much easier in the long run. It really, really, really is. Because you're not going to have to live a life of resistance and deprivation. You're not going to have to live a life thinking that you're different from other people and there's something permanently wrong with you. You just get to move on. You just get to be a regular person. And you get to choose whatever it is that you think makes you happy. This is going to be so much easier in the long run, even if it is harder at first. And it may not actually be harder because, like, I know for me personally, having people convince me that I couldn't trust my own thinking and nothing that I thought was correct and all of it was going to get me killed and that I couldn't ask questions and that I just had to believe what was in the big book and go with that, that was hard for me. That was extremely difficult. I'm not someone who can just follow along with things that I don't genuinely endorse or believe in. That's one of the reasons that I can do this job because I 100% believe in this stuff because I'm awful. I'm so bad at faking it. I'm terrible at it. Just absolute garbage. I can't I can't fake stuff that I or behave in a way that follows a framework that I don't endorse or that I think is incorrect. And if you tell me that I'm not allowed to ask questions and I'm supposed to sit down and shut up and listen to other people speak, like this is not going to work out for me, man. It's just not. So I personally thought, although this was difficult at the beginning, and you kind of do have to fight a little bit of a war with the outside recovery community, depending on how involved in that stuff you are, or how involved your family might be. That could be challenging because what we're saying here is so contrary to what they believe. But this is going to be so much easier in the long run and so much happier. The first month after I read the Freedom Model, even it was happier than I'd ever been at any point post finding AA, having been in an A, like at my first AA meeting or anything like that. Like it's not even close. So just know you're in an important point of reflection. So seriously consider why it is that you like doing this thing, what the utility or benefits might be, and how real those are. And I think I know who this person is, so she is relatively familiar with the material. So I know you've got this. You've absolutely got this. And then I know it's been a long journey to get to this point. So you're doing a phenomenal job, and you should absolutely give yourself some credit. Don't be too hard on yourself. Really don't. I have to tell people that all the time, only because I do that to myself. So don't be too hard on yourself. But you're absolutely headed in the right direction, and we appreciate you being here. Um, Daniel, got anything?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to comment. I noticed this where she says it's to find a life where I don't want to drink. It's to find a perspective where you don't want to
Right.
drink,
It's a
right?
perspective, right?
Because once you have that perspective, then you can move on to like having whatever life. right? But again, don't presuppose that you have to build some sort of a life where it's like, well, the life itself is going to make me not want to drink.
No.
That's not the way it works, right? Your perspective has to change. Once your perspective has changed, then it's like, well, I don't want to. It's that straightforward. Like people don't do things that they don't want to do, and unless there's
Yeah,
some sort of benefit somewhere,
right. There's
right?
benefit or there's extreme coercion. Those are your options.
Exactly. And in which case is still some sort of a benefit, right? Like
Right.
if you're
You're still choosing
torturing
to
me,
be coerced instead of whatever the consequences of resistance are.
well, if you're twisting my arm, I'm like, well, I'd rather just do what you're telling me than have my arm snapped, right? So in a sense, I'm still looking at it from that
Right.
viewpoint
You're
of
making
like,
a decision.
one of
It's a
them better.
crappy one, but
So,
yeah.
anyways,
Um,
yeah,
all right. Next question. The third question. Excuse me. The pleasure. This is a paragraph, so bear with me. The um, the pleasure chapters in the book and course are something that I'm really trying to understand. My problem behavior is with paid sex, porn, and food. So these are behavioral problems. I am replacing in my mind references of drugs, etc., with sex. I think it's the same slash similar concepts. I understand pleasure is entirely subjective, and that the set and setting make a big difference. I really understand that point because I have countless examples in my life and of those around me. But somehow I can't seem to let go of the idea that an orgasm is the only pleasurable is only pleasurable as a result of my mind. Even if I had sex with someone I'm not attached to in an uncomfortable place, surely the orgasm would be pleasurable. That's a question. Actually, now that I write it out, maybe it would lose some of its intensity if my mind is not comfortable. This person's like coming around midway through typing this. I don't know. It's hard for me to compare other pleasures to this. I definitely enjoy some music from time to time in video games. If I can perceive anything as pleasurable, does that mean I can make beans and Brussels sprouts and other things that I find bland now pleasurable? If not, then how can I use the information in this chapter to help me stop my problems? So there's a lot. There's a lot encapsulated in there, but basically, this is the setup. This person has a number of behavioral problems. One of which they think is immensely pleasurable, and they obviously believe that to the point where it's causing problems in their life. Otherwise, they wouldn't be here. So this is pleasurable enough for them to continue doing, despite whatever the consequences are at the time or whatever it is that they've been in the past. And they're trying to figure out just sort of how their perception of pleasure and their beliefs about the benefits of whatever it is that they're doing um, is relevant to stopping or regulating this behavior. How do they use the information in this book to regulate this behavior? Um, which there's another one where there's a lot packed in here. If you want to go ahead, Daniel, because I have a good
yeah.
bit to say about this too.
Well, there's a good part where he basically, this person comes, like you were saying, midway to the realization that
Like
there's a
surface, like
massive
halfway through.
difference. Yeah, there's a massive difference between like the mechanics of things and the fantasy, right? So I think that's important to look at. But when he started talking about beans and sprouts, like my first idea was like, well, there's this thing called acquired tastes, right?
Right.
Like when people
Also, taste is like
people
actually a physiological phenomenon. Like
well, yeah,
not
people learn
perceived.
to enjoy tobacco. They learn to enjoy alcohol. They learn to enjoy coffee. Like I don't know anyone who enjoyed their first cigarette. I don't know anyone who enjoyed their first shot of hard liquor when it comes to like the physical
Yeah,
sensation.
like the
I
taste.
don't
Like
know
the
anyone who
burning just
enjoyed their first
objectively
coffee,
sucks.
right? But you do it a few times and you learn to enjoy it to the point where it's like coffee that really tastes like crap. Like I personally am not the biggest fan of coffee. I um and I don't really drink it these days. Um, right, because it's
It's just like
basically like dirty
beans all
water.
over
It's
the place.
dirty water with caffeine in it. Um, but people, like people will fight you to the death for coffee, you know. Same thing with tobacco and alcohol, it's like everybody chokes on their first cigarette. Yet, I know a guy who was murdered over cigarettes. It's like, yeah, we acquire these tastes. So if for some reason you wanted to acquire a taste for beans and sprouts, I guess you could. I don't see why you'd
Could be
want
doing it
to.
right.
Um, you know, Like there's no secondary benefit, and if you don't enjoy them in the first place, because again, when it comes to like taste, like that's highly subjective. So if you don't like them, I don't see why you'd build a benefit to like wanting to like them. But technically, you could, right? That's exactly what I was saying. It's an acquired benefit. Um, but again, he references pleasure and pleasure and pleasure. But there's satisfaction. Overall satisfaction is also something that's important to look at in life. Um, the podcast that just came out today, they were talking about this, how you don't have to stop liking something to stop, right? It's like, no, you don't have to like stop like doing drugs, or you don't have to like stop going, acting in a certain way in order to stop. It's not a prerequisite. Obviously, if you stop liking it, it's going to make things 1,000 times easier, but you can stop, for other reasons. Um, and there's something that I learned in an acceptance and commitment therapy training that I really, really like, and it's called the magic pill question. And the magic pill question is: imagine if you had this pill that if you took it, you would feel pleasure for the rest of your life, right? You would just feel so good. It would just be the most enjoyable feeling you've ever felt for the rest of your life. Would you take it? And the vast majority of people would take it. Obviously, it just makes sense. Now, if you put a caveat to that question, you go, well, there's only one side effect. And the side effect is you can't move, you can't go anywhere, you can't see anybody anymore. So you have to be stuck in your room for the rest of your life alone, right? Would you take the pill? And at that point, pretty much everyone says no,
Right.
right? And then it's like, well, all the reasons that just ran through your mind why you would say no, right? Those are bypassing that whole idea of pleasure, right? Those are things that you enjoy more than this highly subjective idea in the first place of pleasure, right? Because life is a lot more than that, right? Satisfaction, happiness is a lot more than just pleasure, right? So I think that there's a bit of a focus in the wrong direction on that by looking so much at that idea of pleasure, right? So yeah, that chapter is good, but there's a number of chapters before it, and there's a number of chapters after it, and the entire book builds on itself. So when you get to that, it's kind of like, throwing the cherry on top of the sundae, but the sundae itself has already been cleared out, right? Um, so yeah, that was pretty much my take on that. Just consider these things when we're talking about pleasure. you know Not
Right.
only is it highly subjective, but it's not necessarily the most important thing in life either when you sit down and really reflect on things.
Life isn't purely hedonism.
Exactly. you know um
Right.
most things that we really enjoy in life, whether that's like people, places, and things, come with a certain price tag that we don't necessarily enjoy, right?
Right.
It's like my family, family, for example, that most people really enjoy their family, they really love them, but at the same time, these very same people can get on their nerves, and it's like, oh my god, I just wish I didn't have to see you all the time, or whatever, right? So yeah, I think there needs to be a certain focus on that as well. You know.
Right. So adding on to that, just as Daniel said, this isn't like the pleasure thing doesn't have to be the most important thing. Obviously, we're not. You don't spend life just chasing and hopefully not immediate gratifying pleasure like at every waking moment. Like every day we exist in some level of delayed gratification. Like we go to work so we can get a paycheck, and then we pay taxes so we can like not go to jail for not paying taxes, or just like there are things we have to engage with just to exist. So um, in this instance, we're talking about an orgasm, which is, for most people in most circumstances, is going to elicit a degree of pleasure. But I don't think that that's the problem here. I think the person here can still consider this a pleasurable experience and still fix the problem. Like that doesn't need to change. The problem here is that the person's beliefs, probably around the entire experience, including the pleasure, are distorted in some capacity, which is creating this like super inflated evaluation of the act itself. Like most people enjoy sex. Like just that's just the way it is. We're supposed to, so that we can continue with our species on this planet. Like most people do, but you don't see most people like pursuing it to the point of like complete relationship dissolution and like losing their jobs and like all kinds of stuff. It does happen, just like in the same way it happens with drugs, because it's almost the same, basically the same phenomenon. But it's not super common. So something about the way that whoever asked this question looks at the experience of having an orgasm, whether that be in an experience with another person or by themselves, obviously, that makes it way more important than it should be. There's something about this activity, some utility that you think it's giving you, that's creating this, it's giving it this inflated, elevated status in your mind for some reason. So you don't have to stop liking it. Just like you don't need to like you don't need to convince yourself that you like hate sex or orgasms now to like stop doing this. That's not the method that we're preaching here. We're trying to tell you to create a realistic, well-informed assessment of your options in your situation. Um, so if I had to guess, there's some sort of comfort that this person gets in the ritual of doing it, or in the experience themselves, or the experience produces a reliable effect that they enjoy, that they seek out for comfort, or there are other things going on in this person's life that they're just not happy with, and they look at this in the same way that people often look at drugs, as an effective distraction or as like a coping mechanism. The pleasure is like a temporary escape or a way to deal with that. There's some sort of utility you've injected into this activity to make it more than what it is. And that's why it's become so important, to the point that you're willing to pursue it despite the mounting consequences, whatever those might be. So the way you asked at the end, um, if you can perceive anything as pleasurable, does that mean I can make beans and Brussels sprouts and other things I find bland now pleasurable? Like, if your goal is to eat beans and Brussels sprouts to be healthy or whatever, you don't have to find them pleasurable to eat them. You could still make yourself eat them. Like, or you can cook them in a different way to make them better. Like, there's a bunch of things that you can do. So you don't need to convince yourself that you hate something, or like swing to the opposite end of the spectrum. Like, we need a realistic analysis of whatever it is the activity is in your relationship to it. So then you ask, if not, then how can I use this information in the chapter to help me stop my problems? Well, it's basically what I just said, is that you personally, you're going to have to figure out what sort of added benefit or utility you've sort of injected into this activity that makes it so emotionally important to you to keep doing despite whatever problems that it's causing you. It doesn't even have to be causing you problems. It could be just that you want to stop doing it, or that you don't like that you do it so much for whatever reason. If you didn't like it or didn't find these other benefits, whatever they might be in it, you wouldn't continue to do it, period. You just wouldn't, as we've talked about extensively so far in this Q&A session. Like, there is a reason that you're doing this. I don't personally know what those are, what sort of added benefits there are, but they are there. So the way that you use this information is that you approach this activity as earnestly as you can, with an understanding that, just like with drugs, the set and setting, basically your own mind, can dramatically impact the experience itself, whether or not you're giving yourself permission to relax now, or tune out the rest of the world, or whatever it is that you're cueing by engaging in this activity that's making it feel better to you, is a construction of your own mind. And you need to acknowledge that, and everything just sort of falls away, and you see the activity just for what it is. And at that point, you can decide whether or not you want to keep doing this, whether or not it's actually serving you in the way that you want it to. Because it sounds like you're ready to do something different. So again, I don't know what the specifics are, because I haven't had an intimate conversation with this person. But there are reasons there. Whoever asked this question, just take comfort that this is, again, a product of your belief system around the activity, which can be changed. And once you change that, you can change the behavior. And that's it. That's how you use the information. You just have to figure out what sort of emotional attachment or utility you have wrapped up around this activity. It doesn't matter if it's a behavior or if it's a drug. The Freedom Model works for both, because This is a program about belief systems. It's not even really necessarily just about the drugs. It's about the way that you have a relationship with these things and what you believe about what they do more than anything. It's all internal, which is great news. It can be bad news because it can be difficult, but it's great news because if it's there, if it's internal, if it's in your beliefs, you can change it. If it's a brain disease and it's lifelong, you're kind of just hosed. We're all hosed. But fortunately, it's not. It's in your beliefs, and we can change those. So I just highly recommend taking a really digging deep and taking a close examination about and asking yourself the questions like, when am I doing this? Am I doing it as a response to something? Like, what happens if I don't do it? Do I create an anxiety? Does it create an anxiety? Like, why would the anxiety be there? What is it that I'm worried about? Asking yourself questions like this to try to get to the bottom of what sort of purpose this is serving for you, if that makes sense. Because there is a purpose. I promise there is one there. You just have to figure out what it is and what's sort of tied up in that. So again, I know that that's a lot, but Daniel, if you have anything to add to that, go ahead.
Yeah, no, exactly. There's some sort of learned connection to there that's just pretty strong. So like I was saying, there's a number of chapters before getting to the chapter of pleasure,
Right.
right?
Yeah, that's what I was
So
looking
it's
up
like,
on the side of me.
yeah, jumping straight to that chapter because it's like, well, that I think that's the one that's the most relevant to me is not the right approach to
No,
things,
there's a
right?
lot of
The
stuff you need.
program, exactly. The entire program builds on itself, right? Like, I know for a fact that like if I was to start with any student at any time on chapter 17, right, that they call BS on it right away. It'd be like, nope, 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 that's wrong, blah 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 blah. But
Right.
by the time you get to chapter 17, they're like, oh, this actually makes sense because
Right.
they've understood all this other stuff before, right? So I think that's pretty much where this person might be at is just jumping to those chapters without really having delved deeply into the first chapters into the beginning part of the book, right? But again, when it comes to pleasure, yeah, it's acquired taste and it's subjective, right? There's lots of people that enjoy stuff that's just like they didn't enjoy it at first and and the opposite is true as well. There's stuff that you really enjoy until one day you no longer enjoy it. But that's not necessarily the way to go. That's kind of like when I was talking about my friend Mike, who had a panic attack when he was smoking weed, and now he no longer smokes weed. You don't have to have a panic attack in order to like stop
Right.
smoking weed, right? Like that's not the way to do things. Or the guy who I was talking about who solved his anxiety by falling off the balcony and smashing his face,
Right. We don't need
and
to
he had
get you to that point. Like, I burned my
yeah,
whole life to the ground before I fixed everything. We don't want you to get to that point. One of the purposes of doing this is that we're trying to skirt around the whole. In AA, they call it like you need to hit rock bottom. You absolutely do not. You don't even need to have anything bad happen to you. You just need a realistic assessment of what your options are in your situation so that you can make an informed decision about what else to do, right?
exactly. So, um, yeah, we're already at the 50-minute mark, and that was like our third question. So we might want to like
That was
keep
the
on
fourth.
going.
We got yeah. So I'll go. We have one, and then sort of a little tiny one, sort of at the end. We'll may or may not get into. But the next one is I am a mental health and addictions worker, a certified Canadian addictions counselor. I had a breakdown a couple of weeks ago, like bad. Yesterday, I met a therapist through a workplace program, and I told the highlights to the therapist. I assume about AA. One of the highlights is a loss of identity. She said at the end, "Don't worry, I will not ever prescribe a meeting or 12-step programming. Um, wait until I tell her about the freedom model. I have compassion fatigue. It's not because I didn't do my fourth step correctly or I'm not grateful enough." Um, there's like two things in here. Daniel, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Well, this person also posted something about a year ago, I think it was, when
So
they
that might be
were, yeah, when they were leaving A and they were like giving away their books and their coins and all that stuff. So yeah, obviously, if you've been working in the field like for an entire year after realizing the truth, that can be very, very, very hard.
Very.
And I could totally relate to that. I worked as a counselor for years where it was like, a lot of what other people would be saying to the clients, or even, what the clients would say themselves, I'd be like, yeah, that's completely off. That's just not helping you at all, you know? And when you have to censor yourself about stuff on a regular basis, that's also like very painful, right? But when I was reading this whole compassion fatigue thing, I was reminded of my therapist back in the day, and I'm talking like 17, 18 years ago. My therapist told me, he explained the triangle, the victim, savior, persecutor triangle to me. And he was like, this is what you have to watch out for, right? So you have the victim, but and the savior, right? But the thing about the victim is they don't really want to be saved by the savior. So if the savior puts too much energy into trying to save the victim, eventually, they're going to get angry and they're going to turn into the persecutor, right?
Right.
Where it's like, oh, this person doesn't even want to help
Yeah.
themselves and blah, blah, blah. And they're just going to get angry, and it's not going to be helpful at all, right? So you have to be mindful and careful with that, right? Um, a lot of people, and this has been my experience, a lot of people who are in, whether it's in the fellowships or in rehab culture in general, they don't necessarily want to move on. They don't necessarily want to change. They're just content being the way they are, where they're just kind of like drifting through life and stuff. And if you invest yourself a lot into this stuff, especially emotionally, that you can burn out, which is really really painful. So unfortunately, now that you know the truth and you're an addictions counselor, the odds are that you're most likely going to have a change in your career path. Either that or just be phony as hell for the rest of your career, which really sucks. You know, that's something that I didn't want to do. Um, so that's kind of like unfortunate, but at the same time, you got to be true to yourself and true to the facts, you know. And I think that's a lot more important than just parroting the narrative. So hopefully that of somewhat of help, and I know I can deeply relate to this person's post when it comes to that stuff, because it's hard, to be in an industry where the accepted level of success is lower than spontaneous remission, right?
Significantly.
And where you pretty much like have to presuppose that everybody's messed up and there's something fundamentally wrong with them and that they're never really going to get anywhere. It's painful to watch, and it's even more painful to participate in. And that's one of the reasons why I left rooms, actually, was because I just started seeing how harmful these ideas were to people, and it was like, I can't be part of this. You know, I was a very happy person in the rooms. I was one of those guys. I wasn't like a fake till you make it. I was like, man, I'm having a great time because I'd already decided to quit, and then everybody was patting me on the back for doing something that I wanted to do in the first place. So it's like zero effort on my part. So yeah, I get where you're coming from, and I wish you all the best. And you're feel free to private message me if you want to discuss this stuff further if you're listening to it. If you're listening to this podcast, because obviously there's things that I'd rather not discuss too much like that. But one-on-one, we can discuss this, especially since I'm in Canada as well, and I was a counselor as well. So yeah, that's that for that.
Awesome. I don't have much to add, but the only thing I was going to say is that I'm glad that you found a therapist that takes this position. Other than the freedom model, finding a therapist that was on board with me in terms of what I believed about addiction and everything was one of the most important things that I did, because I was actually able to work on my problems without having all of it shoved into this like big book lens where everything was about whether or not I was an addict and everything was about character defects and blah 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 blah. The only legitimate help that I ever got in therapy was whenever I found a therapist um, that absolutely opposed the AA framework and sending people there. And I was basically given free range to process things honestly and come to conclusions about my framework. Obviously, guided with professional help, etc. So I'm glad that you found someone like that, and keep on going. Like I said, it sounds like Daniel's got some stuff in common with your situation. So feel free to message him if you have anything, or any of us really. We'll be happy to help you out.
Yeah.
Lastly, do you have
Yeah.
something else you want to say?
Yeah, no, in the mental health field in general, you will find those types of therapists, but in the addiction field, I've yet to meet any really. At the very best, they'll be like neutral about
Yeah,
AA.
mine was outside the addiction field, so I think that was one of the I kind of lucked out, but also I went outside of the bubble that I was trapped in.
Yeah, exactly. At the very best, in my experience in the field of addiction, at the very best, you will find people that are absolutely neutral, right? Um,
Which
but
makes me
and,
angry.
and
Not even angry. It's
yeah,
just very
because
frustrating to me when people take me
yeah,
for what.
neutral is it's a bunk position, right? But you can't really push back against AA in any way, shape, or form without being crucified, and that's like the bottom line. You and we've talked about this a number of times. If you speak out, you get canceled. It's that simple. So yeah, let's jump into the last question.
All right. The last we want to end with, which is real short, but it's important to look at stuff like this. Hello, everyone. I was MIA for a while. It's been a struggle. I'm not going to lie. I want life so much. I want to live and be free from addiction, but it's a battle I feel like was this I don't know if this was supposed to say can or can't win. A battle that I can win. Hopefully it says hopefully it's can. Let's go with can. But yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I think the first thing that came up to me when I was looking at that is just if you're listening to this, I just want to remind you that using does not automatically equal death, right?
No.
It's like
Or
not an
lost.
all or yeah, it's not an all or nothing thing. And then you're speaking about this battle, but it's not like there's a little green monster inside of you that you have to defeat, right? You're not. It's not like you caught the addiction virus and now you're like fighting it like if it was a flu or like COVID or something like that, right? You're ambivalent, right? You're seeing benefits in your using, and you're also seeing benefits in not using, and you're like, yeah, well, and so you're kind of like dancing on two dances at the same time. Um, so I think a big part of the struggle is mostly because you think that there's something to fight. you know the first thing would be looking at it and go like, what do I really want? And that's a very, very hard question to answer. I remember years ago, someone asked me that, and he said, they just said, "What do you want? What do you really want?" And I didn't know what to answer. I couldn't answer. Um, but again, this person, you're a member of FMI, so I would highly suggest starting off with, sitting down and watching the video program and going through stuff, because even though the post is very short, there's a lot of presuppositions in there that are completely off. And I can understand why you believe these things, because I think we all did. And but they have to be deconstructed. And there was a point where where things will switch around. And if for whatever reason you feel like you need private instruction, reach out to us. We'll be happy to help you out. But yeah, the bottom line is, there is no mind virus that you have to somehow fight against. You're basically in this position where it's like, well, I want to go left, but I also want to go right. you know it's like, I want my cake and eat it too. Like, it's absolutely normal. That's when people struggle, when they're ambivalent. When you're not ambivalent, you don't struggle, because you just make a decision, whatever that decision is, and then
Right.
you just move on to that, right? It's only when we're chasing two rabbits that we struggle to catch one rabbit. So
Um, I honestly don't really have that much to add outside of that. Again, you're. I'm glad you said this person is an FMI member. If that's the case, I'm certainly glad. But if you're looking at this as still a battle, then it sounds like there's still there's still some ways to go with the content because we know that this can be hard. We're absolutely not dismissive of this, especially if your life is pretty chaotic or you've got a whole bunch going on. This can be extremely difficult. Or if there's like in my case, there were significant consequences for not buying in to AA or whatever the presented paradigm was for you. We know that this can be hard, but you're not fighting a war. This is not a battle. Who would you be fighting? Yourself, your brain, the inanimate objects that are the drugs. Again, like we've said over and over again, this is a problem of belief systems. It's about perspective. And I know people can get frustrated whenever we say that because they think it sounds dismissive, but it's absolutely not. Because some of the most difficult things you will ever do in your life have to do with your beliefs and about your perspective on life. So that it is in no way dismissive of how difficult this can or this may or may not be whatsoever. Um, so to this person, I'm glad you're back. Since you said that you were MIA, I'm sorry that it sounds like you might be having a little bit of a difficult time. You absolutely can move on from this and be free, just as you say that you want. Everything that you need to do that is already inside of you. Um, you don't need anything else other than that, than the right information, which we've got in the book and in all of the FMI content that you have access to. And if you're an FMI member, if you have other questions that you need help with, you can use the Q&A sessions with Mark and Michelle to ask further questions. Or if you just have like random everyday questions or whatever, you can feel free to email or private message Daniel or myself or somebody else involved with Freedom Model team, and we'll be happy to help you with to the best of our ability. But this is not a war, but you can absolutely overcome this and move on with your life. Um, it's all internal. Like I said, great, good news and bad news. It's internal. It's great because you can change. Bad news is it's you. So you gotta dig deep and you gotta figure out what it is that you believe, what it is that you want, and probably make a lot of corrections about your belief systems related to your relationship with whatever the drug it is that you're using. But you're gonna get there. Um, as we say, as always like to tell people, the odds are immensely stacked in your behavior. Over 90% of people get over the problem, independent of whether they went to treatment, independent of what the drug is, independent of how long you've been using the drug. It doesn't matter. You're almost certainly going to move on with your life and get over this problem. So take comfort in that, whatever amount of comfort that you can take in that. And just know that it is going to get better. And we'll do whatever we can to help you get to that point. But you've got it all already inside you. You just need the right information. That's it, man. Um, but that's it. That's all I got. You got anything else, Daniel?
Yeah, no, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It can come off as very dismissive, but that's not at all the issue. Whether you look at things as being like a habit, for example, there's this huge presuppositional difference between like a bad habit and an addiction. But think about it this way: who do you know that has no bad habits whatsoever? Right? These people don't exist. Everybody has things that they want to change, that they're struggling to change, right? That they have issue with, you know. Um, so we're not minimizing things by saying that there's no little green monster inside your head forcing you to do things. What we're saying is that because there is no green monster, you do have the ability to make those changes. And at that point it's like a question of looking at like what you believe about substances in order to make it easier, in order to make it simpler. Because again, like today's podcast, I think it was episode 129 this morning. But anyways, like they were saying in that episode, you can quit something that you still like. You don't have to like want to absolutely quit at all costs in order to quit. But that said, it's a lot simpler, easier, and more straightforward if the magic and the mythology around the substances is gone. You
Right.
know, then there's no white knuckling it whatsoever. It's just like, yeah, I just don't feel like doing that anymore, right? When you don't feel like doing stuff anymore, you don't tend to do it, right? You just move on from that.
Just stop. Right. Like with everything else.
Yeah.
It's
So,
unfortunate that as a society we've made that not the case. We've made it not like
yeah,
everything else, which has made it
yeah,
difficult for so many people. But we're fixing it. We're working
exactly.
on it, guys.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of deprogramming to go through, and that's why I was recommending to go through the video course as yes as an FMI member, because those the first two lessons, which was basically the first four chapters, I think, including the appendix and stuff. That no, sorry, I'm at forward and the appendixes and chapters 1 and 2. They really start breaking stuff down when it comes to all of this. You know, that whole idea of addiction. And in my next lesson, that's most likely what I'm going to be discussing as well. So if you want to jump into what we've learned this week, there's been some really great messages up till now, and mine is coming up. The next one is coming up in 2 weeks, and I will be discussing that. This whole idea of addiction and the presuppositions that come with it, and why it's so harmful, and why we have to like completely avoid that addict self-image, and that whole idea that there are people that are different from others called addicts because of how harmful that is. So,
Right.
as an FMI member, you'll get access to that. But yeah, start off with the video stuff, and in 2 weeks we're gonna have another show, and Mark and Michelle are gonna be having the Q&A before that, the live Q&A. So if you studied up a bunch of that in the next 2 weeks, you can bring all your questions to them and post some of those on the discussion forum, and we'll bring them up. So you'll have a lot to work with at that point.
All
So
right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. We immensely appreciate all of the questions, any and all engagement, everyone that participates in our group and outside of that. Um, Daniel and I can be contacted at the email addresses that you can see on the screen below of our faces. You can also message us on Facebook if you would like, and anywhere else that you can find us. I believe our contact info is on the website as well. But again, if you're interested in moving on with your life from your drug problem without calling yourself an addict, without going to meetings, without admitting powerless, without committing to lifelong abstinence, or doing any of that absolute nonsense that we're trying to get away from, please check us out online.thefreedommodel.org, where you can find the Freedom Model International. It's a monthly subscription, $39.99. It comes with the entire book, the digital copy. It comes with the audiobook. You get a workbook. You get access to personal Q&A sessions with Mark and Michelle, who are some of the founders of the program. Um, I just completely lost my train of thought. My brain just completely melted.
You got the three
Yeah,
video programs.
here you go.
The
You take over. Go ahead.
You get the three video programs. So the program, just the general program, Freedom Model for Addictions. Then you have the For the Family program. Then you have the AAD programming program. You got the monthly newsletter. You got the weekly lessons, what I learned this week lessons, which are really awesome. They're short lessons, but everybody brings their little nuggets in there that are just beautiful. And you have the monthly Q&A, and like you were saying, Matthew, you have as well the audio version, the audiobook version, and the digital stuff, including the workbook. So you tons of resources in there, um, you know, and so we hope to see you there. And the next Q&A will be in 2 weeks, just before our Q&A, our live Q&A. So
Right.
on June 29th, Wednesday, June 29th is going to be a double whammy for FMI members. You
So
get,
much content.
yeah, you get both Mark and Michelle, and then you get us after. So I think that's that, and we'll see. We'll see you all then.
All right. Everybody have a wonderful rest of the week. And we will see you all next time.